This is Jessica Dunn, and this is Economic Development Finance. Today we're going to be studying Chapter 11 in your Seedman text. Venture capital usually finances fast-growing and new technology firms. Without venture capital, firms are at a great disadvantage because it impairs their ability to raise equity and to create the cushion necessary to raise debt. It does help small firms gain access to debt capital. Venture capital, the capitalists, those that provide the money, cash in when the stock goes public. That's their largest, best way to cash in. It's how they make the most money. There are three types of venture capital funds. The first and the most popular is an independent firm. These are often organized as a private limited partnership. The investors provide the capital as limited partners. The professional venture capitalist is the general partner and they manage the investment funds. Investors do contribute most of the money, roughly 99%, and the general partners, they invest very little. However, whenever the venture capital fund makes money, the general partners are keeping roughly 20% of the earnings, while the general partners are splitting the remaining 80%. Um, Pensions are often organized with, uh, they often use the money within a pension to provide funding for venture capitalist funds. Second type is a financial institution. Financial institutions sometimes have a leg of their bank organized as a venture capitalist fund. And the primary reason why they do that is to generate IPO transactions for their investment bank. So they would invest equity into a company with the hopes that they would go public. And once they go public, the investment bank would assist the company in going public. So they would receive fees from it as well. So they would cash out from the good business decision. And secondly, they would make fees from assisting the company going public. They may also do it so that they have a full array of services for their clients or to maximize returns, but their primary reason is to generate business for their investment bank. A third would be a corporate subsidiary. A company would have a venture capitalist fund primarily to support emerging technologies in their field. So a company would invest in a new technology within their field with the hopes of being able uh, to use that within the company. So they would be related to their core business, and or to purchase the company in its entirety later um, as a aid to their current business. Venture capital is cyclical. Large venture capital investments usually follow a strong IPO market because venture capitalists make money primarily through initial public offerings. They can make money in other ways. So a company or a venture capitalist could make money because the company itself buys back the stock or pays them back for the equity, or because a second company purchases the company that they have invested money with. But their primary way that they make money, the largest bulk of their returns is going to come through an initial public offering. Venture capitalists often co-invest with other venture capitalists. They do this so that they can diversify their investments and to reduce risk, but it also allows them a second opinion. So how do venture capitalists make money? We've already covered this a little bit. They convert their illiquid equity into cash um, through three primary strategies. First is an initial public offering or an IPO. This is the most profitable exit strategy. Second would be acquisition of the firm by another company. Or third, a buyback of stock from the firm. So the firm would purchase the stock from the venture capitalist. Most investments are going to make modest returns. A small share of the investments are going to generate the bulk of profits. Um, they even expect 25 to 33% of all investments to fail and result in total or partial losses. So, a very, very small portion of companies that they invest in are going to actually make it to the IPO stage and make the bulk of the returns. And here are this average size of venture capital investments. We can see that over the years, the number of venture capital investments has exploded, as well as the size of the investment. So, venture capital is becoming more and more popular. There are three phases of the venture capital industry. First would be fundraising, second would be investing, and third would be exiting. And we're going to talk about each of these independently. So, first up, fundraising. Venture capital investors have no direct control over the management of their money. So, you, as the limited partner, you don't have any control of how your money is invested. So, how do they entice managers to handle their money correctly? Um, just like you do in a company, it's through large incentives. So, they get the um, venture capital manager, the one that is making the investments, is going to receive large payments when they make good decisions that realize positive returns. So it can be difficult to obtain money. Here is where the money for venture capitalists usually come from. We see that pension funds and individuals are the largest sources of venture capital in the 80s. And today, it is mostly, again, still venture capitalists, but then also insurance companies and banks. So they are increasing the amount of money that they are investing in venture capital. Investing. So venture capitalists want high returns. They usually invest in early stage and high growth firms. Um, there is evidence of herding in venture capital. They are usually going off after similar types of businesses. As you can see here, um, total information technology is got a huge number associated with it, as well as um, communications hardware and services. So there are some industries here that are receiving a large bulk of the total venture capital available. And that's not that there aren't good investments in other industries. It's often because these venture capitalists are going to invest in um, companies that have a strong history of IPOs. So they're following what investors are chasing. So there is evidence of herding. Monitoring is also costly, so venture capitalists often choose to invest in nearby firms. And a lot of times, groups of firms are closely related geographically as well. I mean, think about that with like Silicon Valley. There's a lot of high tech firms there close together. Um, Venture capitalists often co invest with other venture capitalists to reduce risk and to diversify. And so they too are looking for, they have to merge their wants. And they often go after the same types of companies repeatedly. There are three forms of exit, like we've talked about: an IPO, acquisition of firm by another company, or buyback of stock. And most investments provide modest returns. The Small Business Investment Corporation Act was enacted by the SBA to license and finance private investment firms to supply capital to start up and early stage small firms. These firms would receive up to $4 in low interest government loans for every dollar of private capital that was contributed by the SBIC. There are two major problems with the SBIC. First off, using debt to fund SBICs is fundamentally incompatible with providing equity. It encourages SBICs to lend rather than to invest. They must lend to firms with positive cash flow, not startups, because they are having to repay this debt that they have borrowed from the government. They cannot invest in early stage firms and wait to receive returns. They're going to have to see immediate cash flow from these investments so they can make repayments on the loans that they have. Second, large federal subsidies and a strong stock market attracted inexperienced and poor managers to the SBIC program. So 782 licenses were issued between 1976 and 1997, but as of 1997, only 25% remain. I already covered that, excuse me. Um, the special SBIC program, this is used to finance startup and growth of minority owned firms. It needs roughly $10 million to make an impact and see any profits. Small special SBICs quickly run out of cash, and if they do not have short term income, they often don't have enough cash to support their operating activities. So, the takeaways: venture capitalists require the right kind of capital to succeed. The funds must be large enough to operate efficiently and cover operating expenses. And finally, private sector investment and management does not guarantee success. These private managers must have skill and experience. So, how do states expand venture capital supply? First off, they can directly invest in firms through state controlled institutions. They can invest in privately managed funds. And finally, they can provide incentives in the form of tax credits to increase private investment in targeted areas. There are some rules that states do need to follow, however. First off, the state policymakers should not be involved in the investment decision making. They need to have an expert do this. So they need to hire a manager who understands investments and can make good decisions that will yield positive returns. Programs must have sufficient compensation to attract skilled and experienced managers. So these venture capital managers are paid quite handsomely. And there needs to be enough cash available to pay these managers. Funds need a strong focus on investment returns to ensure political and financial viability, but they also need to attract private investors and co-investment from other venture capital funds. And finally, they need a steady stream of good deals, so marketing is very important. And here we have TEDCO. This is an organization. It's a flagship organization. It's in Maryland, and it provides up to $75,000 per company to support research and development on a specific technology. So this is an example of the government creating their own program to invest in startup companies. It's especially attractive to startups because it does not take equity components in the company. Instead, they receive royalties and cash awards. A company does have the ability to buy TEDCO out, and they do have a hands-off approach. But the ultimate objective is to foster technology-based regional economic development in Maryland. Community development venture capital. This is private venture capital. Let me reemphasize it is private, but this venture capital has the goal of both positive financial returns and social returns. So they're having a twofold bottom line. So this venture capital usually generates more modest returns, and they are more difficult to exit. IPOs are usually not likely, but the goal is to invest in businesses who are likely to create good jobs for people with limited job opportunities. And here is the link that I was trying to click on. The CDVCA, this is the Community Development Venture Capital Alliance, and it has a listing of all community development venture capital funds. So you can go through each of these, and there are quite a few here. Here is one that is Kentucky based. The targeted region here is the state of Kentucky. There is no specific targeted industry. The goal is that it would stimulate growth and create employment opportunities in southeastern Kentucky. And they do have a website. And so it does list each of these, so you can go through and look at these if you are interested. There are necessary inputs for a venture capital fund to succeed. First off, there must be many entrepreneurs that want to start a business. Second, there needs to be an innovative environment that generates new businesses on a sustainable basis. So we need continual desire for new businesses to be created and plenty of entrepreneurs to do that. Third, there needs to be a skilled labor force. So it does no good to start a new company if there is no one to work at that company. And finally, you need support infrastructure. So you need attorneys, assistants, accountants. You need all of these different professionals that are there to support businesses. The challenges, first up, are strategic challenges. So there are specific economic conditions that are required for a company to succeed that we just covered. Second would be operating challenges. So you do need to attract fund managers that have some skill, and you have to have the cash to pay them. And if you're wanting to meet financial goals, then strong oversight is required. So not just financial, but if you're wanting investment in specific areas, you do need to have strong oversight of this venture capital. And third would be capitalization challenges. So you need enough money to have a diversified portfolio to cover operating costs because it's going to be a while before your investment returns accrue. And a company may need follow-up investments. So you may invest in a company and they may need additional capital in order to sustain profitability. A good source for cash could be a bank needing to meet CRA requirements because this would count for them in meeting that. So the role of the economic development professional here would to be acting as a broker. So you would kind of bridge the gap between the company and the venture capitalist. And so how would you do that? You would need to know the venture capitalist. You would need to be able to identify possible business startups, and you would need to be able to link entrepreneurs with the technical assistance that they may need. So where can you gain more information on sources of venture capital? This is the Western Association of Venture Capital. You can join this group. And second, Here on Amazon is the Pratt's Guide to Private Equity Sources. So additional um, places where you can find information. Oh. Seed capital, you can get that through crowdfunding. Here is SBIR, it's America's Seed Fund, and it's powered by the Small Business Administration. And here is an article by Forbes. This is the top 10 seed funders of 2013. So it is a little old, but there's quite a large listing here of places where you can get money.